I'm very excited for this. I'm also excited for the fact that today's event doesn't have any like presenter at the beginning. So we get to spend a lot more time in the Q&A conversation part than, because a lot of times it feels like we rush through that part at the end. And today we get to really have a conversation with our panelists about what their experience has been being students at universities. And then now Nina is a postdoc, so she's been through school and is working for a university. Let me share this other graphic that has information about our speakers. All right, so you should see their faces on your screen. And just so everybody knows, we are recording our webinar today, so it'll go up on YouTube later. I'll introduce myself to start with. My name is Claire. Probably most of y'all have met me at some point, but I work at the Frist Center at Vanderbilt University. And our center is focused on autism and employment research. So figuring out how all autistic adults can have access to the support and empowerment in the workplace that provides equal access. But one of the things we really were excited to do this April was, instead of just talking about research, actually elevating some autistic voices and having conversations and talking about, in practice, what does it mean to have an inclusive environment of, any type? And today's focus is on university. So I don't know if many of you are current students, if you work in a university setting, maybe you're someone who is autistic and is considering attending university. Maybe you're a parent of someone. Whatever brought you here, this is going to be, I think, a helpful conversation coming from lots of angles there, no matter what sort of spurred your interest. And I want to begin by having each of my speakers introduce themselves a little. So you'll see here, we've got their names, we've got their pronouns, we've got a little bit of information about them. But if there's anything else that Nina, Emery, Ben, anything else y'all want to say about, how you got diagnosed, or how you ended up at this webinar today. Anything that you think provides helpful context for our audience. And why don't we start with Nina? Because Nina, you logged on first. You were here early.
Thank you. So you already briefly introduced myself. So I'm currently a postdoc. I'm working in the field of astronomy at Vanderbilt. I'm a member of WENA, and why I came across WENA was just after about 2 years ago, when I accepted a position at Vanderbilt. I was looking around for groups where I might fit in, and then I stumbled across this group, and I immediately signed up for it. And since then, I'm a member, and I'm always a strong advocate for being neurodivergent. So this is something that is very important for me to highlight that.
Great, thank you, Nina. And that's some perfect context for how you ended up on our panel today. Ben, is there anything else you would like to add to your description about who you are or how you ended up on our panel?
I'm good.
All right, perfect. And that leaves Emery. What about you? Any other introduction you'd like to fill in for us here?
Specifically, I'm a junior at Vanderbilt. I'm studying English and communications, and my brain is not working today. I can't remember what else I wanted to say, so I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Well, hey, that's all we need to know. So you're looking at 3 people here who are navigating the university system in some way. Nina, like I said, has gone through, I think, Nina, where did you do your undergraduate education? Was it in Germany?
It was in Germany, as well as I did my PhD in astrophysics also in Germany.
Okay.
And after that, I came to the US to do my first postdoc at Caltech, and after that, I came to Vanderbilt.
So, and I think that's really interesting because Nina's got some perspective on what it's like to be in the university system in Germany, her home country, and now working here in the US at Caltech and at Vanderbilt. Emery, you are a senior, am I correct? You're a junior.
Junior.
You're a junior. Okay, that's right. You just said that. But that means you've had, at least 3 years now of being at this university and trying to figure out what inclusion means, what accommodation means, how other people perceive autistic students in this space. And then Ben is a part of Next Steps, which is really exciting because Next Steps is one of the most advanced inclusive education programs in the country. And we've got several of our Next Step students here with us today who are Vanderbilt undergraduates pursuing a certificate through Next Steps in whatever area of interest they have. And so Next Steps is including students with all kinds of intellectual and developmental disabilities and helping them channel their strengths into real work skills. And so we've had the privilege of having Ben as our Frist Center intern this semester. And the amount of research he has done for me, graphics he's made, stories he's helped write, has been incredibly valuable. So I have a list of questions here, and I don't want this to feel like we have to just bounce back and forth on the question. So if any of my panelists have a thought you want to throw in at a sort of random point, I'll stop our screen share here. Or if at any point one of our audience members wants to contribute a thought via the chat or has a question they'd like to ask, I would encourage you to jump in. Oh, Emery says that what they forgot in their introduction was that they were diagnosed in 2018, so late diagnosis. And that's, I think, an important piece to address here too, is, so I'm on the spectrum and was diagnosed I was 19 years old, so late. And we are not a space where you have to have a formal diagnosis to identify as autistic. You just have to be someone who says, no, I clearly identify with all of this. So if anyone, Nina or Ben, wants to add anything about your diagnosis, you're welcome to do that.
Yes, I can add something on that. So I have no formal diagnosis. This is simply for the reason that I'm doing well at university. I don't need any accommodations. And so there was just no point for me for getting a diagnosis. And when I studied in Germany, it was even more difficult because when you have a diagnosis for autism or ADHD, it can, in some contexts, be perceived as having some kind of a mental illness, and this can give some difficulties with insurances. And I just don't want it to have that, because as I said, I'm doing perfectly fine, and I don't want to have a label that's causing some problems. But just regarding neurodiversity, I'm very open about that. I openly talk to people about that here in a webinar and also elsewhere, so I'm totally fine with that.
Amazing. Okay. And here I've got these questions. All right. So the one that I want to ask everyone first, but thank you for filling that in, Nina, is why did you decide, like, in the first place? So for Nina, for you, this decision was several years ago. Ben, Emery, for you guys, this decision was more recent. How did you decide that you wanted to attend a university, that was the path you wanted to take on the way to finding a career one day? And, let's start with Ben. I would love to hear from you. How did you decide to apply to Vanderbilt?
Well, my sister had attended UT Knoxville, and some of my friends in high school were talking about going to college, so it made me want to go.
Okay, so you saw friends and family do it, and it sort of set that bar of like, I'm interested in that too, and I'm going to pursue that. Great. And then Nina, tell me for you, because I know in Germany it was really pretty a different system. You've talked about the types of schools there and the way that they channel you into certain careers. What was the decision like to go to university?
For me, the decision was clearly I wanted to do research. I'm somebody who just loves doing research, doing also things like coding, developing algorithms. So I'm a very research focused person. So it was clear for me to attend university. However, it was a bit more difficult because I'm a first generation student. So I'm from a working class family, and I was the first one in my family ever to go to university. This means I had to overcome a bit more difficulties in the beginning just to find out, for example, where can I study, which fields are there, what want I do. And so it was a bit more difficult, but I always liked being at university and then becoming a researcher.
Well, and I want to follow up on that a little bit, because you've been at schools, overseas and here in the US. You've worked at Caltech. Why did you apply to Vanderbilt to work here as a postdoc?
Yeah, it was just because of the research field.
Okay, so it had the research opportunity you were looking for.
Yes. And after I was accepted for my position here, then I came across here is also something going on regarding autism, and then I just wanted to take a look what's actually happening, and why not just was what I was looking for, because the universities I attended before, they had no such groups. So I was leading a similar group in Germany, but it was not connected to the university. Then at Caltech, there was nothing. there was a group for students with learning difficulties and with depression, but I was just not fitting in as a postdoc, doing well at university, and so I was never attending their meetings because I just felt this is not what I'm looking for. But here I feel totally comfortable with participating because I see that I fit in.
Okay, so I'm hearing in part that your experience at Vanderbilt as an autistic student is a little bit different because we have Vanna as a resource. And we're going to circle back around to that, which is why I mention it. But I would love to go on to Emery next. So Emery, tell us, how did you decide like you wanted to apply to universities, that that's the direction you were headed with your life, but then also that Vanderbilt was where you wanted to be?
My parents were pretty emphatic on the college path from when I was a little kid, and they didn't know I was autistic when I was little, but they did know that I was gifted. So I had a lot of teachers and I guess also special ed teachers, because of the challenge program that they put gifted kids into, were like, okay, you're going to go to college, you got to go to do the accelerated courses and all that fun stuff, and you have to apply to all the hard places to get into. And I heard that Vanderbilt, I only lived about 40 minutes away, so it was just one of those that was like, oh, that's the big place that everybody says they want to get into, but they can't. So I'm like, oh, really? And I just kind of took it as a challenge and ran with it. From, I think it was 6th grade forward, I was just stuck on Vanderbilt.
It's funny, Emery, because my experience was very similar. I'm from about 45 minutes out of Nashville and Clarksville, and was like, oh, that's where everybody here wants to go. And in about 5th grade was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And for some reason, never changed my mind. So I relate to you there. All right. Well, and Grace says in the chat that she has a question. So Grace, you can either type it or turn your mic on if you want to throw your question into our panel.
In grass that I think someone is next to me.
You have a question about autism?
Okay, well, about autism, I was like, do you want to do some work?
Okay, Grace, I'm having trouble interpreting your question, but
Okay, listen about.
how about
Okay.
if you end up having something that you guys want to type in the chat, that might be a better way for me to figure out what your question is for our panel, because I would love to answer it if there's a way for us to. Perfect.
All right, I do it.
All right. Oh, I muted myself. While Grace is typing, I'm going to shift to our next question here, but they're all related. So whatever's on her mind, hopefully we'll be able to connect it back in. I want to know how Vanderbilt has supported you three as an autistic student in the case of Ben or Emery, or for Nina as a staff member, faculty, kind of living in that space as a postdoc where you're employed by the university. Is there any specific way that you feel like Vanderbilt has understood you and tried to like really support the unique needs you have? And let's see, we can go back to Ben, or if anyone else feels passionately about breaking up the pattern, you can jump in.
Vanderbilt has helped me with all kinds of support. I get tutors, accommodations such as note taker for my Vanderbilt class, and anything else I ask for.
Okay, so Ben, I'm hearing you say that Vanderbilt has been really helpful, that they've done everything they could to accommodate you.
Yes.
Do you think that the people you meet at Vanderbilt are really welcoming? Or
Yes.
would you ever describe them as being confused about what autism means or not knowing about the Next Steps program?
I think they know everything about I think they know about Next Steps.
Do you think people have a lot of awareness at Vanderbilt?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad that's been your experience. Now, I know that sometimes we've had a question, and I'm actually going to go back to Emery on this one, because when we talk in the student group that Emery is vice president of, the Vanderbilt Autism and Neurodiversity Alliance, sometimes we talk about how it seems like people are disbelieving or don't feel supported when or the autistic student doesn't feel supported when they disclose that to a professor or to a friend, a roommate, an RA. Emery, what has your experience been with support from sort of the university and its people?
I've had pretty good luck with it. I will say that the student access side of things, it seems pretty difficult to figure out what exactly they can give you, because they'll say like you can get, they say like time and a half, which is just like you have 30 minutes and then you can add 15 more minutes, like that's straightforward enough. But then they say things like advanced provision of class material. I have no idea what that means, and I don't know who to ask what that means, so I don't even know what accommodation I have. On the upside, professors are usually super understanding, because I'm not just autistic. I have ADHD. I have an anxiety disorder. I have just a lot of stuff going on up here. So most of the time I'm able to just say to a professor, hey, I have a lot of problems and they're giving me a hard time right now. Can I get an extension? And they're like, yeah, sure. I don't usually have a problem with that side of things.
That's great. And in fact, the people at SAS who might could answer some of those questions, I think one or two of them might even be on our webinar. So should you have specific questions, yeah, Jamie is in the chat. That is someone you should, direct message now if there's something she can answer for you, because she's been very helpful when we've communicated. But sometimes it is confusing. Like what accommodations do I qualify for? What access should I have? How do we make sure it's an equal playing field and that my peers aren't, jealous or think that I've made up this diagnosis for some sort of accommodation? And so figuring out exactly what you get and why and how to explain it to people can be really complicated. Also, yes, I do get sometimes that I look like Taylor Swift. So I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. There's a message in the chat. If y'all don't have the chat open, I'm not just complimenting myself. That would be weird. Okay, let's move on to Nina. How have you been supported by Vanderbilt University as a postdoc?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
So my experience as a researcher at university in general is very good. As I said, I need no accommodations. I just work like everybody else in my field. What is very helpful for me is indeed that this field fits me very well. People are usually communicating very direct, and there is not a lot of fuss going on. So it's just easy work environment for me. What is most important for me is just being accepted the way I am. For example, I'm a very direct person. I don't like meetings in noisy environments such as restaurants, and I'm not so good at recognizing faces of people I should know. That's it, basically. And on the other hand, I'm a very reliable, honest person, can concentrate well on long and complex tasks, and this makes me just fitting well in this field. So in general, my experience as a researcher at Vanderbilt is very good, as well it was at other places. And also as a postdoc, everything is working out really good here, like it did before. So there is no special support I need, and I've always felt very welcome here.
I'm excited about the positive feedback I'm getting here, because it's not the same things I was hearing 5 years ago when I was a student. And that means that Vanderbilt is getting better at figuring out what it means to support any person on the spectrum, because depending on the level of support needs you have, you might, like Nina, be someone who finds a job that's a good fit, for the way your brain works. And then all you need is coworkers who, understand you, and all of a sudden you're good to go. You don't need specific, accommodations that are mandated by any office. Or if you're somebody who needs a little extra support in note taking or support in course assignment adjustments, that's the kind of thing that can also be coordinated through Vanderbilt, and a lot of times is for our students who come in through the Next Steps program. So I'm seeing that Vanderbilt is actually making strides in providing that support, and that Vanna too, and this is where I wanted to circle back to your statement about Vanderbilt Autism and Neurodiversity Alliance. Vanna provides a socially inclusive place where it's not just about accommodation. And I found that important as a student, and Nina, I've heard you express that before. Emery, I assume, having run for vice president of Vanna, you found something of value in that space as well. But the follow-up question to this And actually, let's pause for a second. So it looks like Grace's question for our panel was, is there any way that someone can lose their autism? So I think what she's asking is it something that once you're diagnosed, you have it your whole life? And the best that we know, Grace, the answer is yes, that if your brain is made a little bit differently like that, that it's always going to be a little different. I don't know if any of our other panelists want to expand on that any.
Yes, I can say something on that. So I have no formal diagnosis, but I think I can say something on that because I believe that everybody is able to learn certain things. Everybody's able to evolve, and it is different for each person. So, for example, years ago I was super shy, but now I'm more outgoing person. Now I easily say, okay, I'm on that webinar, or next week I'm leading a tutorial or webinar on astrophysics. Yes, I'm doing it. So this is something somebody can learn, but of course, you just also stay somewhat the person you are. For example, I would for sure never be somebody who says, yes, it's a great idea to have a birthday party with 20 guests and music is going on. I would never do that. Or I would also never be, for sure, never be somebody who would say it is boring to do something that I actually like. So it's just the way I am, and it's just the way like everybody is, their own personality.
It's so well said. So if you think and perceive differently, you always will, but also you can learn things you didn't know before. You can learn different kinds of social skills or ways to cope with anxiety that comes up when things change at the last minute, or ways to, calm yourself down when something is really overwhelming in a sensory way. So yeah, Emery or Ben, do either of y'all want to add on to that question?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question was about whether or not you can sort of lose your autism, or whether you're always going to be on the spectrum. And we were talking about how your brain is sort of always wired that way, but you can learn new skills. Do you have any experience, Ben, with, noticing that your brain is wired differently and that part doesn't change, but that you're developing any specific skills within that? It's okay if you need to think about that question for a minute too, because it was a really long one.
I don't have anything. Sorry.
Okay. Perfect. In that case, let's keep this discussion going. And the follow-up to how has Vanderbilt supported you was, is there anything that you would like to see at Vanderbilt that doesn't currently exist? So, you guys have had generally positive experiences. Is there anything that could have made it better that you want to see at Vanderbilt and other universities in the future to support their students, or to support staff, faculty, even guests to campus? And so, what could the school have done better, or could it do better in the future? All right, Ben, you want to jump in on that one?
Yes, ma'am. The only thing I wish could be better is if we could go back to campus right now. We can't because of COVID, but that's no one's fault.
Okay, so I'm hearing that it's tough to be off campus, which I agree. That's where a lot of my connections were. And so to not be around them is really hard, especially for people who aren't always very socially talented. And I don't know about you, Ben, but I'm not socially talented. That's something a lot of us who are autistic have in common. Okay, well, let's go next to, let's say, Emery, because we just heard from Nina more recently. Is there anything you think Vanderbilt could or should be doing, or that universities as a whole should be doing to support autistic people?
I don't want to make this whole thing a shameless plug for Vanna, but it's like I see a lot of emails and promotions for things like Autism Speaks You, which is a group on campus that's more about advocates for, I could get into the politics of Autism Speaks.
You know what's interesting about that, Emery, is literally like in the last month, that organization is rebranded as Autism Tennessee VU. I think in response to some of the challenges and questions that have been raised. And so I'm not sure if they're still affiliated with Autism Speaks at all, but at least their social media accounts have changed. So as a point of information. Also, to answer Kat's question in the chat, I am also autistic and ADHD. It's lots of fun. Yes, but go ahead.
Like, I don't know, my point was that we're listening more to advocates for us than to just us. I think that it could, I mean, it's like you have the opposite of LGBTQI life. You have a Black cultural center on campus. I think that it would be really helpful if there were, like, if there were more collaboration with like the administration and the students in the community or staff in the community, anybody involved that could really speak to that experience directly and say like, hey, this is what, this is what we're celebrating this month, or these are the kinds of accommodations that we might need, or things like that.
Well, and your use of the word celebrating there brings up the excellent point that too often universities are accommodation centered, like how do we comply with the law, and not often so celebration centered of like, you've had this whole unique set of life experiences and your brain works in this cool way. And, kind of like, right. So Pat mentions in the group me here, like a cultural center at a university. Felicity House in New York. Absolutely. That is a very neat place to look up if you're not familiar with it. It's in New York City and it's like a cultural club for autistic women. Anyway, this idea that there is a cultural piece that we have to recognize, I think I agree with you that that's something that universities need to develop. Nina, what would you add?
Yeah, so from my experience in Germany, as a student, I want to say there were no such groups like Vanna, and my biggest problem while I was a student was really connecting with others. So it was difficult for me for obvious reasons. The other students were hanging out at the loud places. They were going to the commons. They were going, when they were a bit older, to a pub after lessons. They were going to a football match during the weekend. Whereas I was more somebody who liked going for a stroll in the botanical garden or drawing pictures while sitting on a balcony. And it was always very hard for me to connect with people because often it was just so overwhelming sitting in a noisy full lecture hall with about, let's say, 500 students at an introduction to analysis lecture. And then I quite often immediately left and went home. Yeah. So the difficulty then was, of course, finding people to work with. I had liked it a lot to have fellow students, to talk to them about mathematical problems, about physics, just the things I love, but I never made those connections because they just choose their fellow students or mates regarding how well I fit in at certain leisure activities. So I had liked it a lot if there would have been a group like Vanna, where you can just meet people who are also a bit different in a certain way, where it just doesn't matter, or where it's more normal when you say, no, I'm going not to the pub, I stay home, or I prefer to go for a walk instead. Something like that to connect to people.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So it's like universities have got the compliance part down and we're just waiting for the cultural community-based, social support piece to be in place.
Yes, that's true. Because also as a student, I had never needed any accommodation, something like more time or somebody helping me with writing. It was never a problem, but I just had problems with, for example, finding somebody I could talk to about let's say, which professor is better at giving a research opportunity for summer? Usually students talk about it.
Exactly. A lot of those conversations happen in these casual social networks. And if you don't know how to get in.
I had no such network. And I was Googling a lot. I was using web forums where I was then quite often accused of being just lazy and I should ask my friends at university. And was not a good idea because there weren't any at this time, and it was just some kind of struggle because I had more workload because I was not able to make the social connections at that time.
Absolutely. Well, and before we go to our next question, just on these sort of conversation starters I have working down on the list, we have a question from Tega in the chat, and I don't know if I'm reading it. Would you like to ask your question out loud, or would you like me to interpret what you've written? Because I'm trying to figure out what you're getting at here, and I want to make sure we really address what your question is.
Yeah, no, thanks, Claire. Hello, everybody. I was just thinking as I was listening to some of the students talk about some of the social relationship challenges that they experience, and it made me think about some of the things that I observe with my son, who's actually still in high school, but has ADHD, deals with anxiety, is a super talented kid, but he has highs and lows. And I was wondering if the students could share any advice or coaching on how do you deal with finding the right channels to share that. So most people that deal with those things have a therapist or they have hopefully great parents that support them. But from a social setting, it can be exhausting to peers. Like my son tells me that, like they're tired of me talking about, he's just being his honest self. I just wanted to know from your standpoint, have you guys found that to be challenging? Peer outlets to share your highs and your lows? And do you have any suggestions on how to um, make better choices in doing that? What's that like for college students?
Sure. Okay. I see where you're coming from here. This question of when other peers are not experiencing those highs and lows so intensely, or when the things that cause a high or a low are really different, like let's say a bad sensory experience and for someone else it was no big deal at all. How do you convey that in a social setting when someone else isn't feeling the same thing? Okay. I think I'm on the same page with you
No,
here.
that's exactly it. That was hard to write, but yeah.
Oh, exactly. Which is why I thought you want to explain it for us, but this is perfect. Gosh, my first thought is I am relating to that of like, how do you, because what you do to build connections is you share with people, you share about yourself, the things that are good and bad. But you count on the other person relating, or at least relating enough, even if they don't relate entirely, that they're like, oh yes, we bonded over this. But let me pause myself there, because while I have a couple of thoughts, I want to give my panelists the chance to address this. Do any of you three have feedback that might help Tega or her son?
I could say something on that. For me, the thing was having difficulties was connecting to people. It usually started a bit earlier when just typical leisure activities when you could potentially meet people were just not lining up that well, and then there were often quite awkward situations when, for example, once I was invited to a discussion for students, and I thought this might be something for me, and then the discussion started just a bit chit chat about what somebody did over weekend, and they told about they were invited there and that, and they have to get a birthday gift for their friend, and so and what were you doing? And I said, I went for a walk, did some bird photography. Then it started to fall apart, the discussion and the connections, and then they just recognized I'm not fitting in, and
Right.
for example, wasn't invited anymore. Something like that. So this it always was that thing, and I think it gets better when we are in an environment where you share more common interests. So for example, I had much better luck when I joined a group for an astronomy club. So it was easier to have a topic where you can connect. So it at that point it didn't matter what I did over weekend, but it was more important that maybe I had the same plans for observing sunspots, or that I was also excited about the new comet that is coming in next week. So I had a topic that I could share with others, and so it was also easier for them to connect with me.
Thank you.
And to see what my values are, for example, being reliable, being honest, then they could see that.
Thank you for sharing that. And they saw that you were able to be into what they were saying, like you said, like-minded people.
Yeah.
And I think
Nina's point there about,
thank you.
I think if you connect on one piece, even if it's astronomy, they're more likely to want to listen, even if what you share is not as relatable, because you've already related on something else.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, Emery or Ben, is there anything you want to add to that question? Or even if you want to keep thinking about it, you're welcome to put something in the chat later, but I want to give you the chance now to address it if you have any great thoughts.
I don't think I got anything. Sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, no worries, Ben.
Okay, thank you.
This one, it's a pretty complicated question for me because I've been the one that needed to unload a lot, and I've also been the friend of somebody that needed to unload a lot. And it was hard because usually both of us were mentally ill, and so we had to kind of, like, one person had anxiety, the other one had depression or borderline or something a lot like that. I grew up around a lot of people who struggled with problems like that growing up, but it was a habit I learned kind of the hard way, that it's good to check in with the other person before going into these heavier subjects of, like, I need support right now, I'm dealing with some stuff, like, are you in a space where, you know, you can talk about that and it just not feel like, I'm taking on a lot of emotional baggage and I have a lot to deal with right now. Just kind of starting with like hey, I'm dealing with something, you know, can I use you as a vent, or can I ask for some advice or something, like preempting the venting portion with just like, it's almost like a verbal content warning, but it like prepares the other person going in, instead of just like, wow, you are dealing with a lot. Wow.
Take the temperature first.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Great advice, guys. We'll start on our next question with Ben, because I am eager to hear him tell us again about his experiences. And I want to go back to my conversation starters, because I know, Ben, you had a chance to think about these too in advance and decide exactly what you wanted to share. So the next question I have here is, did you ever feel like your classmates or your teachers treated you differently because they knew you were on the spectrum? What do you think?
No, my next step's classmates and teachers are all great. We all get along great. My Vanderbilt professors that I've had for classes have been so kind.
Okay, so you felt like truly included in those spaces by the people that you've been with.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
I love that. All right. Well, and I'll go on and ask you the next question, Ben, because it's really connected. Have you ever told someone, it could be a teacher, a classmate, that you had autism and you were on the spectrum, and they didn't believe you, or they were like, I'm not sure about that? Or do they usually say, okay, I take your word for it? You know, like, tell me what I need to know.
Some of my family took a long time to believe it, but most people don't say anything but nice things.
Okay, so you haven't had any trouble at Vanderbilt, but you have had other people in your life who had a lot of questions about what that meant and whether it was true.
Yeah,
which I think,
my friends and family believe it back when I was in school before I went to Vanderbilt in college. My mom believes it. My best friends from school believes it. So yeah, they're good friends, and my family's a good family.
yes, well, that's the support network you need, is to understand that there really is a unique way you were made and that you need those supports in place. And I want to direct those questions next to Emery or Nina. Whichever one of you decides you'd like to answer them next. I'll repeat them one more time. Do you ever feel like classmates or teachers, or I would say like peers at the institution, Nina, for you, have treated you differently if they know you're on the spectrum? And has anyone not believed you when you've disclosed?
I can say something on that. So my experience as a researcher is, as I said, very good, and it's not a problem for me to work with other people, and I usually feel very welcome by them. And on the other side, as a student, it was much harder, because you had to make those connections more by similarity in your activities, or by sympathy. If you're, to say it simply, if you're just the funny guy who's smiling a lot, you might attract a group of people you can work with. And if you're more shy, then it's not a case. But as a researcher, I'm working within a research group, and if I have a question, I can just send an email. I can just look up people on the internet, send an email. I know with whom I'm working with, and it's much easier. So I've never had any problems. Let's say since I started my PhD, but experience before was very, very different. And I just recognized that people, yeah, just not want students, while I was a student, just don't wanted to work with me, because for them there were a lot of other people who fit more to, yeah, what they expect from let's say from another person their age.
What I'm hearing is that children are cruel, and that extends all the way through college. They tend to be somewhat exclusive and cliquey, and if you're different, they are not likely to welcome you with warm open arms.
Yeah. For example, they as I recognized this a lot later, what actually was going on. I was always thinking, yeah, why they're not choosing me for, let's say, for lab work, doing together lab work, or doing exercise sheets that were assigned as group exercise sheets. Why they're not choosing me, despite I had very good grades. I thought, why they're not choosing me? But then later on, I found out they more wanted fellow students who are, for example, after doing the exercise sheet, going to the pub, or while doing the exercise sheet, making a little break where they're making jokes, where they're doing chit chat about other people, and it was just not how I was doing it.
So for you, the exclusion by classmates particularly wasn't even because you disclosed any diagnosis. It was just because you possessed those autistic traits. And instead of people welcoming you anyway and getting to know you, they made those snap judgments.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is painfully relatable. Let's pass the baton next to Emery. If you want to tell us, do you think any disclosing the diagnosis or just like traits of being autistic, and has anyone ever not believed you or been like, no, you don't look autistic, when you disclose to them?
This was just because I was diagnosed so recently. It's been, I haven't had a lot of time to disclose to many people, but I've had a variety of responses. It was when I was first pursuing my diagnosis, my sister, who has a bachelor's degree in psychology and also turns out to be ADHD, and I highly suspect autistic, was very adamant, you're not on the spectrum, I do that. Now we see how that ended up, but just face first into the point and still missed it. But there was that. I've gotten from one friend of mine when I just got the diagnosis, oh yeah, I could tell. And from make of that what you will, I was a little I didn't know how to take that. And then I've had one aunt look me in the face and tell me outright, no, this is on the side of the family where many of my autistic relatives are. She just looks at me and says, you're not autistic, you're just introverted.
I'm so glad she knew so well about, you know what, I'll stop the sentence there, because if you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all.
No.
But that is a frustrating response to get when you have lived your whole life understanding that there's something really different about you, and then other people in a moment are saying that's not true. But I am glad that you don't have any horror stories of more people in the like college age generation who are just sort of denying it. I'm hearing that that's more often to maybe come from older generations who were taught differently as they grew up about, you know, what it meant to be autistic or who could be autistic. So I'm hoping that among people who are, you know, 30 and under, we see a lot less of that.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to undergrad programs in English and communications. People are fine. I never get any of that from them.
Yes, that's great. And our final discussion question here, and then we may have a couple of minutes left if anyone else has wants to pick any of our panelists' brains, has a question they want to pose to everyone or someone in particular. But the last discussion question I have for the three of you is, what would you want future autistic students to know? So if they are, you know, find this webinar on YouTube and they're thinking, I'm considering applying to a university and I don't know if I'll belong, I don't know if I'll succeed, you know, or maybe you want them to know something about how it is changing, or I mean, what piece of knowledge or advice would you give to someone who either will be an autistic college student in the future or is considering it? And let's go right back around the circle. Ben, would you like to start?
Yes, sir. it's fun, a great way to meet more friends when you become an autistic college student.
Okay, so you would advise them that they get to make lots of connections.
Yes.
Ben, do you feel like it is helping prepare you for the rest of your life after college?
Yes.
Okay, so there's that dual piece of like you get to make connections and friends, and you get to learn and prepare yourself for what
Yeah.
comes next. So
Yeah.
it's been a good experience. You would tell them to do it, to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. And Nina, we'll jump to you next. What advice or information would you give to a future autistic college student?
Yeah, so my advice would be choose a field you really like and try to make connections. And if it doesn't work to make connections as a student, try to work around that. And it usually gets much better when you're working in a research group, even as a research assistant. So yeah, when it doesn't work out with fellow students, just during everyday encounters, then just try it where it's more research based, and it usually works much better.
Okay, so a piece of advice: if you're out there watching and you're an autistic future college student, give research a try. And it's okay if you don't love it. I couldn't do it. My brain isn't drawn to research. It uses its sort of hyper logical reasoning to do communications and writing, but give it a shot because it may be a good fit. So I'm hearing that as your advice. I'm also hearing that even if the college itself is socially challenging, those college kids grow up into adults that are generally more mature, and going to college then sets you up to have all these opportunities afterwards.
Yes.
So okay, great. And Emery, what about you? Any advice, any knowledge you want to impart?
Right. I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but it's like, of all the stereotypes of autism, I thought 2 would apply to me. That I wouldn't like the shift in routine because I'd been in the same school system all 12 years, and that I wouldn't be as good at creative writing as I thought I was because my brain was hardwired for like science-y patterns and stuff. And I like grammar. That part is a little bit true, but do it. Absolutely do it. Do not let other people's definitions of what your limitations are stop you, and it will be incredibly rewarding. It will depend on the university. I don't know if it will attract people from all over the world, but I've definitely read books about people from all over the world. I've learned so much about people just from being around different people than what I was used to. And in my opinion, that makes college totally worth it on its own.
I love that. So not always easy, but worth it, especially if you find a program or a college that's a good fit. Well, and so the Director of Student Access Services has been listening in with us today, the director here at Vanderbilt of Student Access Services, and Jamie is wondering if she could share a tip that she's learned about college for students, I assume on the spectrum, but possibly also with disabilities more broadly. So Jamie, whatever it is you want to share with us, please jump in. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I've been in the field for almost 15 years now, working with students with varying disabilities. But honestly, autistic students and students on the spectrum are, I think, a very unique group of students just because all of their differences and strengths are so different, for each individual. And so I really love working with that population. And as I've been moved to my director role, I don't have a lot of direct student interaction. But previously, I think one of the best things that you can do as a student or as a parent of a student is to know what those strengths are and also know what your weaknesses are. So for those who don't need academic accommodations, that's absolutely, that's great. Like you're universally able to participate in college, right? It's equal access. For those that may need participation or accommodations, I would encourage you to talk to the disability office at whatever college you're at, whether it's Vanderbilt or whether it's University of Tennessee, Knoxville or Columbia State Community College, wherever you're going to school, talk with that disability office to talk about the accommodations that they offer. Some students are really, really good with technology and they want to have access to that. Some schools have varying different technologies available to students. Some make it available to a specific subset of population of students. some make it universally wide. So what is your access going to be? And then for those who have parents who are parents on the call of autistic children too, I would say to join your son or daughter within that meeting, that first meeting when they go to college, to talk about those accommodations. Just making sure, I encourage actually a lot of my freshman students to bring their parent in, because you're usually a part of that role for so long in the K through 12 setting. It's a really good transition piece where the access specialist can say, you're in college now, you're going to have these responsibilities, but the parent is also there to hear that and be able to support them in sharing that. But they also know what types of accommodations have helped their son or daughter in the past too. So just, I would say, know who your advocates are, know who that support team is, but know that if you do need academic accommodations, the university is there to share the resources that they have too.
Yeah, well, and that should be present at any university, at least in the US, because the law in the United States is that education should be accessible to everyone. So the good news is that even if you don't go to Vandy, there is a Jamie at every school in some form. Great, thank you so much for sharing from your side of seeing so many autistic students go through a school and trying to figure out how to support them. And you also kind of brought up this idea of like the transition to self-advocacy. And if I had a piece of advice for someone who's autistic, who's considering college or knows they're going to start soon, it would be to think very intentionally about how much of your own story you're willing to tell, whether it's to your new roommate or to your professor, because you don't have to give every single detail of your diagnosis. Or you can if you feel like it's helpful and they get to know you, but think about, as a self-advocate, what is your story? How are you going to tell it? How do you explain what you need to someone else while not revealing so much like medical information that you feel like you're being forced to be really vulnerable? Like there's a space where you're sharing the amount that helps you feel best understood and other people can accommodate you. And I think that sweet spot is different for a lot of people. I know I joke with our Frist Center Associate Director, Dave, about how he's a little bit of an oversharer. He'll tell you about his whole life, about every challenge he's ever had, and let people take information from that to understand him. And then we've met people on the spectrum who don't even like to say that that's exactly what their diagnosis is. They just want to explain a handful of the accommodations they need or the ways that they're a little different, and they need someone to just take that as it is and implement those accommodations. So if you're somebody out there who's thinking about college and is, also sort of entering adulthood at that same time, figuring out who you will be as a self-advocate for your own needs is so important. And we have 5 minutes left. So if anyone has a question or closing thought that they want to add to this conversation, we are absolutely a small enough group that anyone is welcome to jump in at this point. And if they don't, I'll just put back up the graphic for the rest of our April events, because we have 3 more. And in fact, the one next Thursday is about autistic success in non-STEM fields. So we are going to have a featured speaker who is an autistic lawyer who, passed the bar, went through law school, and would say that being autistic is what's made her successful. We're going to have an MD PhD student here at Vanderbilt. So technically that is STEM, but to go into medicine, I mean, you think, even watching The Good Doctor, for a pop culture reference, people believe sometimes that autistic folks can't do such important jobs, and that's not true either. And then our final person is an academic and a researcher who's going to talk, kind of like Nina did, about what it's like to be teaching and researching. So not tech, really, not data analysis, not the places that we sometimes feel like autistic people have to be funneled into, computer science or something like that. But any other final thoughts or questions? Now is the time to speak up.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
As a student at the university, whether it's Vanderbilt or whether you're going to go to another university, or as someone who's participated in other universities, whatever your view is, when you come to university, what is something that you would like to see that's included as part of the university? I think I heard earlier on this call, we were talking about like the LGBT plus center and Black Cultural Center, maybe possibly discussing a disability center. But obviously Vanderbilt doesn't have one of those currently. If we were to create one of those, I think that'd be through something like OIE. It's not on the Division of Administration side. But is there anything that you, just off the top of your head, would want to see coming to a university, my head, I think of like quiet rooms, right? Like it'd be great if we had like a closet like set aside so we could just like sit in a comfy chair and study with our correct lighting and, you know, just kind of get away from the world for a little bit and have those like available in classrooms, right? I know it's like crazy, that's probably would never happen, but we don't know. Like we're Vanderbilt though, and I think we have a great team of students who like to do projects to make our university more accessible. And I would just love to hear some ideas that maybe we could throw out there to some of our other senior design students to add some, I guess, more inclusiveness to our university.
I'm dropping a link in the chat, which is an article I wrote last year for the student newspaper here at Vanderbilt about how sensory-friendly spaces tucked into corners around campus would make a huge difference for neurodivergent students, students with migraines, students with anxiety diagnoses or depression. So anyway, yeah. But yeah, any other thoughts? Emery, I feel like you're usually a fountain of ideas. Nina, you always have something valuable to contribute. Ben, please jump in. If there are any other autistic students on the chat here that want to put a response in the chat, that would be fantastic as well.
It's like, for me, when I'm trying to move to Nashville, hopefully by August, my advisor, Jenny, has been talking to some of the students on the upper class. Would they like to have me as one of their roommates living off campus?
You're thinking about the process of being matched to live with somebody and how the university supports you in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that being a place where, because that is very socially based. I mean, I lived alone all through college because I couldn't figure out who would want to live with me. I could see that being a place where Vanderbilt might could step in and say, let's help connect you, but not just randomly, maybe based on interest or someone who is willing to accommodate your sensory needs or something like that. Yeah, and sometimes you can request a solo dorm as an accommodation. That's something that Vanderbilt does and a lot of other schools do. It's tough when someone is an extrovert and has high social needs, but also cannot figure out who is willing to room with them. So I think that's where we hit up against more of a challenge.
And I'm smiling not because all these problems are terrible and I can definitely relate to them, but a potentially radical idea that has already been pulled off at a university in Pennsylvania known as Mercyhurst. They have a set of dorms specifically for autistic students. I think that could be expanded for a lot of other neurodivergent students, just because that's not, like, you don't just end up with sensory needs. That's not the only thing that comes with having a different brain map going on. But if you need a radical idea, there's one you can run with.
Emery, that's awesome. I had no idea. That's my hometown. I had no idea that they did that. Yeah, that's where I grew up. I mean, my sister played soccer. I mean, yeah, I've been to Mercyhurst numerous times. I had no idea they had a whole dorm dedicated for autistic students.
Well, it's kind of like McGill at Vanderbilt is specifically for students who say, I want to work on an art project and be in a very sort of freeform liberal community. Maybe there could be a floor in a dorm that was like, if you're autistic and would intentionally like to live with other autistic students, here you go. It's 4:01. I don't know where the time goes. I'm going to screen share real quickly here for someone who asked about our next event. If you go to the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation website, it's hosted on Vanderbilt's website, you'll find this news piece. So it's down here on the right side. It's that middle one with the picture of our staff. Some of these events have already passed. We're in one right now, but the next event from 11 to 12 Central Time, this is the Zoom link for it. These are the people who will be a part of it. So you can see that. You can find the link on the website. All you have to do is click it at the time it starts. And then the two after that are going to be a behind the scenes look at the 60-minute special that featured the Frist Center. And then the last one, we've secured at least one currently serving public official, so a state representative from Pennsylvania who's on the spectrum. And so she'll be a featured speaker at that event, but we're looking at bringing in at least one more panelist for that one too. Yeah, so here's all that detailed information you might want. And if you were here at the very beginning, you might recognize that graphic. You can also follow the Frist Center on Instagram, and we will be posting reminders on our story, on our actual feed about those upcoming events and how to access them. So you can follow us if you'd like to at Autism and Innovation. one word on Instagram. I'll put that in the chat. But I want to respect everybody's time. Somehow it is 4:02, so I'm going to close out our meeting now. But I want to say thank you especially to Ben, who joined us today, to Nina, to Emery, all of you taking out this time to give some advice to other people, to be honest about your experiences. It means a lot to the people who are sitting here chatting with you. So, yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes. All right. Bye, guys. We'll see you all on our future webinars.
Thank you.